Okay, hi everybody. Um, I'm Matt Grobert. I am the Director of Capital Reserves and Developer Transitions for the Falcon Group. I've been doing this for community associations now for almost 30 years. So very familiar with community associations and reserve studies and so forth and so on. And I've been asked, obviously, to present to you your capital reserve for replacement fund analysis, which you should be able to see the cover page on your screen.
We do.
We did this back in February of this year, and then sometime after that, I met with your manager and your board and went over the reserve. And that February 18th date is a few days after we met. We revised some of the items in the reserve based on a meeting we had with your board of directors with respect to the reserve. So what I'm going to do is go through this with you as we typically do. I'm going to make the page a little bit bigger, page down, and if you're at home and whether you're following this, you have a copy of it. I'm going to go to page C3, which is the calculation schedules tables, the schedule of items. So if you go to page C3, you're going to see that's the very first page. What we did when we prepared the reserve study, what we do is, in this case, I sent one of my senior project managers down to the community to go through the community, the clubhouse, the whole community. We measured roads, we measured roofs, we measured all the interior of the clubhouse, flooring in terms of square footage, counted things and got quantities. As you see, page 3 begins with your buildings, of which your community is only responsible for roof shingles, gutters, and leaders, and then vinyl siding replacement. Further down, we went through the clubhouse. We quantified the various components that should be in a reserve based on our experience and your governing documents and so forth. And again, we took a lot of pictures. And as you can see, there's a lot of items for your clubhouse. It's rather large. Your HVAC equipment, the various rooms that you have within there. I'm just going to go over this quickly. It would take forever to explain all the line items, obviously. We go through everything right down through your clubhouse interior and the exterior of the clubhouse. The next thing we did was we went through your maintenance building, of course. That's another few line items, not quite as many. And then you have a lot of recreation line items from your bocce courts, shuffleboard, your swimming pool, tennis courts, and so forth. And then one of your bigger items and your high ticket items, of course, is what we have under site work, which is your various roads throughout the community, the pavement and the driveways, fencing. We measured all of that to come up with quantities for all of each one of the roads was measured individually. The driveways were measured and so forth. As you can see, there's a lot of, as you know, there's a lot of roads in your community. It's a rather large community. It's one of the biggest communities I've done a reserve study for. And finally, on page C8, as you can see, there are 259 components in your reserve study. So using all of that, the next thing we had to do was for each of the various line items, we have to assign what we call a unit cost, whether it's in square yards or a lump sum or square feet. Obviously, that's the most important part of the reserve, is what the unit cost is for each of these components. Now, just so you all know, Falcon Group, we do a lot of, we are full service. We have architects, we have civil engineers, we have structural engineers, we have mechanical engineers, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. and so forth. And what our teams, various teams do over the years, every year is for many communities, we oversee, we do design and specifications and bidding for many, and in fact, most of the items in your reserve, whether it's interior in the clubhouse, whether it's concrete sidewalks, roads, driveways, roofs. So a lot of our costs, most of the costs you see in here for the various items are based on current bids we're getting for similar sites as yours. And that's how we come up with these costs for the most part. With some of these things, we get information from other, like with the pools and stuff, we have pool contractors we communicate with if we have questions with that. But most of it we do on our own because we've been doing this for years. So you have all those 250 plus items, components within your reserve. So it's very, very large. Like I said, it's one of the largest reserves I've ever completed. I did your reserve a few years ago, and this is an update of that reserve. So what's important to note is if you go back now, we're going to go to the summary page, which is the most important page here, which is page C1, for those of you who are looking at and have your own copies. The top part of C1 has, I'm going to try to get this to stop moving around quite so much. There we go. So the top part of your summary page is your community information. A lot of it you already know, obviously, the location, Monroe Township. There's 1,757 units in your community. It was built over a number of years, roughly 11 years, 1982 to 1993. As you can see on the right here, after we met with the board, we removed inflation rates. They had initially had an inflation rate. And the reason they removed that, and you may have questions about that, even though we are dealing with inflation over the past few years, especially with COVID, if you include an inflation rate in a reserve, because of the way we have to do it by accounting standards, that rate is applied for the full 30-year time frame of a reserve. A reserve study is composed of a timeline of 30 years, and what it does is it inflates your funding needs significantly because it's applied over the 30 years. And as you know, inflation is not stagnant; it changes. With that said, just so you all know, here's another, you may also have another question regarding inflation. Every time your reserve is updated, we update all of the costs to reflect current rates of inflation since the last study was done. In this case, it was done in 2021. So inflation, the costs have been increased by inflation in the past 3 years, plus, unfortunately, with some items such as your road, pavement, and asphalt type items that are primarily made with crude oil and so forth, roofing and roads, the costs of those have gone up significantly in the last few years across the board, unfortunately, and that's why your requirement has gone up quite a bit because of that. So with that said, I'll move down here and go into the summary page here. Your initial fiscal year, this is for next year. The initial fund balance, as you can see there, is $1,822,000. Now, what that is the anticipated, your management, your board gave us that number, is the anticipated balance as of the end of this year. Last year, your contribution to the reserve was $2,064,000. Your last day of your fiscal year is December 31st. Again, your rate of inflation and investment return on here is 0, which is good. It's always better to do it that way because whenever you do an update, everything is updated to reflect inflation since the last time the reserve was done. And of course, your investment return rate, when we're provided with an initial fund balance, it reflects any interest that you got since the last one was done on your balance. So it does still include interest in investment return, because your balance obviously reflects any interest that's been included in that balance. So the initial percent funded is about 8%. What that is that is really, we're required to provide it. A short explanation of that is that is the amount you are funded, the initial fund balance, the 1.8 million, is where that is in relation to whether you were full funding your reserve or not, which I'll get into in a second. It's really not important in the big picture, because very few communities do full funding, and I'll explain that in a minute why. The important thing to look at here is your estimated initial total replacement cost is $32,239,000. And what that means is if you replaced each one of those 256 components listed in page C3 through C8 once, that at today's cost, that's what it would cost. The PV means present value, meaning at today's costs. Again, the reserve is a snapshot in time. And so we're required by GAAP standards and reserve standards to provide what your expenditure would be over the 30-year time window. I don't know if you can see my pointer, your 30-year time window here. At today's cost, present values would be 67 million over 30 years. The reason that's higher than your estimated initial replacement cost is because many of your items, such as your roads, for instance, which is a big part of this, are going to be replaced more than once over a 30-year term, typically, based on the scheduling. So it's a higher number, and it reflects items being replaced more than once over the 30-year time window. It doesn't really mean a whole lot, because you really should be updating your reserve every 3-4 years at the most, and all of that's going to change, obviously. So we go to the bottom, your full funding, which is what I was just talking about a second ago. Oops, sorry. Let me see if I can move it a little bit. There we go. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
What I'll do is, maybe does that help? I don't know how big the screen is you're looking at.
Yeah.
Okay,
good.
so
Yeah.
your full funding, that 4.8 million, what that is that the calculations are very conservative, and it assumes that you're putting in almost as though you have a separate account for each one of those 256 components. So what that is it assumes say if you have an item that costs $10,000 to replace for the 10-year useful life, the calculations assume you're putting in $1,000 a year for 10 years for that item, and so forth for each of the 256 items. So almost as though the calculations are almost as though you have a separate account for each one of the items, and you're fully funding it each year at whatever that rate is. As I said, if it's $10,000 or $20,000 or whatever, it was $20,000 over 10 years, it'd be $2,000 a year for 10 years, and so forth. So it's very conservative, and that's why that number is so high. The zero threshold baseline, that allows your balance to go to zero at any point during the 30-year term, while still having enough in your account to replace items as they need to be replaced per the schedule. That's $3.5 million. Now, that said, we do not recommend any associations do a 0% threshold baseline funding. And by the way, that's pooling your funds. Unlike the full funding where it's dollar for dollar for each item, with the threshold funding levels, it's where your funds are pooled, which is much more realistic way of funding a reserve or anything. Most people, your household, you don't have a different account, separate account for each one of your expenses. That'd be kind of crazy. So that's with the 0%. Now the 5% and the 10%. the 5% threshold, again, your funds are pooled. And the initial year again, and I need to really stress that this is your initial year funding level, the first year, because it does change. In the first year, it's $4.3 million. At no point over the 30-year term will your balance go below 5% of the $32 million. That's the 1.6 million you see here on the right. At no point, and I'll show you that in a second on the projection sheets, your balance will go below 1.6 million at the 5% threshold funding level. Now, you're not going to put in 4.3 million over the full term, which I'll show you in a second. This is the initial fiscal year. And with the 10%, it's $5.5 million. And the reason that is because you have to make up your initial balance doesn't even equal the 2.64 million is not even 10% of your initial estimated replacement cost. So the reason that's higher in the initial year at 5.5 million is so that you can get that balance up to $3.2 million, which is 10%. Now you'll see here this is as 2.8. There's rounding errors within the calculations, and because it's such a large amount, this is a little less than 10%. But I'll show you that on the calculation pages and the projections, it does show the 3.2 million. So I'm going to go there now and go over that. Go through all of your schedules here. And I understand from your manager that you have all seen copies of this and so forth, so you've had a chance to look at it. So when we get to your projection sheets, you'll see this thing is huge.
Matt, hold 1 second, please.
Folks, for anybody who has not been made aware, this report is posted on Neighbor. You have access to it, provided you have access to Neighbor. If you don't, please check with Coy or I before this meeting is done so we can make sure you have access to it. I'm sorry? It's been up for a month, sir. It was told at the last open meeting we announced this. So we were posting it. Yes, sir. Yes, it was announced at that meeting. It was broadcast. We let it be known. And then when it gets posted on Neighbor, it sends a notification to everyone in the community. You're welcome, sir.
Sorry, Matt.
Okay, so your projection sheets. Page 60, C63, they start on, for those who are following this. This first one is just if you continue at the rate you're funding, the 2,264,000. Obviously, with all of your expenses, it's showing that you'd be in the red, negative balances. Assuming, and again, this assumes that you do the replacements as scheduled in the funding schedule. Obviously, your board has to make decisions how to go about that to balance everything out with your other expenses and so forth. So this just shows if you continue at the 2,064,000 that you'd be, in the red with respect to your funding based on the scheduled expenses until 2042, at which point it's back in the black. Not real important, this sheet, except to tell you that you need to increase your funding level. I guess that obviously that's important. Where did that go? Okay, sorry about that. So the important thing to look at here are your other sheets. Page 64 shows your the full funding scenario, which I went over, which is very conservative. The first 7 years is the 4.8 million, and then it drops down to 2.2 million in 2031. And that's because you have you have roofs and a number of roads that are scheduled to be done in the next 7 years. That's why the number is so high. Now, again, what your board may decide to do, depending on the condition of those components and especially roads, you can do repairs and so forth and increase the useful life by a few years so you can save more to do that. That's something that obviously your board has to make that decision. I don't want to make decisions for them. And then your 0% threshold, the baseline, again, your nominal threshold, at any year it can go to 0. As you can see here, in the second year it would go to 0. In the fourth year it would go to 0. So baseline 0, it's really not recommended. We're required to show you what it should be, but it's really not recommended. Come down here to page 665. You have your 5 and your 10%. Now, as I said, I do over 100 of these a year. I do not just for myself. I don't do all the inspections, of course, but I put together well over 100 reserve reports a year. And I can tell you that 98% or better of those, the communities fund at the 5% threshold level. Very few do 10%, almost none do full funding. Now, if you look at the 5%, the first 2 years, it's 4.3 million. Then it drops down to 2.9, and it goes, as components are replaced per the schedule and so forth, eventually in 2034, it drops down to $1.8 million annual contribution. And that's why I said it's important to look at the initial, this is the initial year, the 4.3, the first 2 years, and then it starts to drop down, and you still maintain your nominal threshold of 5%, as you can see here in this column here. And then in 10%, it starts out at 5.5, drops down to 4.3, then down to 3 million, and it may maintain that 10% threshold throughout the period of 30 years. Again, very few communities do 10% threshold funding. The vast majority do 5. So that, in essence, is your reserve study. And I guess at this point, Michael, you want to open it up to questions, or do I need to go over anything else?
If you could just comment on the notes section, because when people do review this, I know that you have a notes page that has a corresponding legend to tie to some of these line items. I think it would help for them to understand this.
lot of it. Yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you. So what we have here, if you look at the schedule, C3 through page C8, you're going to see, whoops, a little too far. Sorry, folks. This is, it's going fast here. You'll see next to the various line items, not all of them, because some are self-explanatory, like everybody knows what carpeting is, everybody knows what a stage curtain is, but if you look here, like for instance, shingles, gutters, and leaders, there's a 3 and a 14 in parentheses. What these numbers refer to are in the notes section, which is just before the calculation pages, starting on page C8. And all those bracketed numbers refer to these table notes. For instance, the one with the roofs. The 3 is the cost used assumes complete replacements of the existing roof systems with allowance for flashing, underlayment, ventilation enhancements, as well as removal and replacement of vinyl siding where the roof meets the sidewall to allow for proper installation of flashing at these locations, and so forth. So the note describes what that cost assumes. So it was 3, and then 14 is, or 13 rather, is an allowance per, did we have the right number there? I may have to, we screwed up on this, folks, sorry about that. It should be note 13. The cost also assumes there's an allowance for professional fees for inspections and preparation of specifications. Now, some communities do that. Some communities, they don't do that. They trust their roofers to do the work, and so forth. And obviously, it saves communities money to do that. Depending on the type of roof it is and so forth, it can be okay. Sometimes it's not a good idea. Again, that's something that your board has to decide. But we'll go down and we'll find other items such as, let's see, your driveway pavement, which is C9 and 13 in brackets here. 9 is first number, which is for driveways. The first paragraph here is for roadways. this paragraph here, the cost for driveways shown, it assumes the existing pavement will be removed and replacement with a 3-inch base and a 2-inch surface course. And of course, the 13 is for, there's an allowance for professional fees and so forth. When we went to your community, you'll see note 10, your pool was closed and covered, so we couldn't really look at the pool itself. We just have to put this in there as kind of a disclaimer and so forth. The pool filtration equipment, you'll see number 11 by that and so forth and so on. So all these numbers describe what the cost shown assumes and so forth, and or how things are budgeted. For instance, with your sidewalks have a number 15 in brackets, and the concrete sidewalk replacement has been budgeted at $13,000 per year for the foreseeable future. That number was provided to us by your association. So if you look at 15 on the schedule,
Yes,
you'll
sir.
see and sidewalks come pretty much last on here. You'll see sidewalks 15, $13,000 a year. So that's what those numbers in brackets are.
Water leak. Leak. Got it. Okay.
Okay.
Hey, Matt, could you
Yeah.
also comment on the exclusions? I know that there were some exclusions from this, and could you just perhaps comment on why those things were excluded? Just pull it up and just talk to that briefly.
The exclusions are based on some things that are typically excluded in a reserve, and also they are typically reflect what your community and governing documents are, as well as what our typical reserve items. The reserve is for capital replacement items only. It's not for annual maintenance. It's not for power washing things. It's not for painting and so forth and so on. So these exclusions: annual maintenance, building mounted light fixtures. In this case, they've been excluded. Doors and windows. This really is just for the units. We do include doors and windows in the clubhouse. Drainage repairs or enhancements. Now, this needs to come out because I think, Michael, when I met with your board, they asked us to put a line item for drainage repairs.
We did.
So when we updated this, I'll make a note and take this out. This needs to be revised. It's not a killer, of course, but it does need to come out. Fire suppression systems, landscaping is not typically a capital replacement item. Painting, as you can see, as I said, painting. Preventative maintenance, power washing, annual inspections, painting, protected or concealed components. Obviously, things we can't see, we really can't include in here. Radon mitigation, if you have those, we don't include those. Typically, they're a unit owner responsibility. Routine maintenance and emergency maintenance. Again, it's a maintenance item, not a capital item. Underground utilities, obviously, sometimes if the community's having issues with their utilities, they'll ask us to put a line item in the reserve for utility repairs, meaning like sewer lines or water pipes or water shutoffs, which I think, again, this goes along with the drainage. I think we added a line item for underground utilities in here. And, sometimes when we add these things, I do apologize, we forget that we have these things in the exclusions because we don't add these items that often. But we did add.
Yep, 259.
Yeah, we did add sewer line repairs and replacements. So I'll take that out as well. Also, just so you all know, we also had to add catch basin cleaning and minor repairs to your reserve as part of the new legislation. We also had to add a line item for crack filling of your pavement, which is also part of that new legislation. Did we put that in here? Oh, you know what? I think what we did was I'll have to look at that part. Roads, parking areas. Crackville, here it is,
Yeah,
256. There it is,
Is-
yeah. Yeah, you have so many items in here, I can't keep up with it. So let me go back to the exclusions, because there are a few more that you probably are curious about. So we took out the sauna. I guess it's not in use. I don't know. The board asked us to not include that. Marble flooring, typically that lasts 50 years or more, and you just polish it and keep it clean. Pavement seal coating, we were asked not to include that because I guess you don't do that in your community. Indoor driveways, maybe the individual unit owners do it. I don't know.
we do seal coating, but it's a deferred maintenance program, not a.
Oh, okay.
Not
Okay.
treated as a capital reserve program.
Okay. Street lights, clubhouse vinyl siding. We didn't include. The golf club parking lot is not included. And then per our last update, hot water heaters, tennis court repairs, recolor, clubhouse patio, masonry walls repairs and repointing, which I assume are just done through operating because they're not a high cost item.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So I do have, it sounds like I'm getting some sound pushing through. I'm afraid to go on the microphone and cause feedback. But I did receive a question, actually 2 questions just handed to me, if I may. First one,
Okay.
is the result of the study, allows the community to develop a schedule when to replace roofs, which would help that the homeowners would not have to worry about water leak. Okay, so the question is, does the study allow the community to develop a schedule for roof replacements to get ahead of the cadence where we're replacing them as they're becoming leaky? I'm not sure how that applies to this study, but if you can try and.
Yeah, we don't, our study really, we don't make this, it's not, the study a reserve study is a snapshot in time. And
Okay.
the other thing that you should understand as a community is that it's not written in stone. Your board's going to have to make decisions based on what your actual reserve balance is versus what your needs are and so forth, whether it's respect to roofs or roads and how those are scheduled. We don't usually, we schedule them in here based on information that we're provided as far as when these roofs were done initially. So you'll see 2000 through 2023, and how much, what the quantities of roofs that were done. And then of course you take that year less the 25 and it gives you an approximate age of when they should need to be done again. Now, depending on the condition of the various roofs, you may not do 4,200 squares in 2025. You may do half of that, or you may do more. I don't know. The board, they can use this schedule. This is what we say based on what the information provided is what should be done in each one of those years and how much it's going to cost. As far as what's actually done, again, we don't get involved in the decisions as to how that's scheduled. That's something that your board does.
Thank you. Yep. One moment. Let me read the next one. So the next question I received, sir, as part of the review, did engineers observe recently installed roofs, and do they have a 20-year life expectancy as they have been told they are?
The new roofs, in fact, it's not going to make a huge difference. I'd have to talk to you about this. I don't know what kind of shingles typically roofs last 25 to 30 years. What's happening now is a lot of communities are starting to use these 30-year plus shingles, and the typical useful life is we're changing over to 30 years for the new shingles. So I don't know, what kind of shingles in 2023, whether you used, your typical shingles, or if they were these new extended life shingles. We weren't told whether or not they were, so we had to assume 25 years, for instance, for the 2023 shingles. But, you know, assuming they're installed properly and there's proper flashing and underlayments and so forth and ventilation, your roof should last 25 years or more. And some of that is going to depend on the location of the roof, sun, shade, how much it dries out, whether there's trees over the roofs or not. That all affects the useful life, as well as attic ventilation and so forth. But typically it's around 25 years, give or take a few years.
Okay. The couple of other questions we received are in the chat. Are you able to see them? And if you'd be so kind, if you could read the question, because the audience can hear you way better than they can hear me.
I have to go out of my screen save.
Okay.
Hold on one second. Let me see if I can find the chats here.
On the sidebar.
Let me see here. If I can show it there. Chat, here we go. Okay, chat. Let me open the chat. I have, oh, here we go. Who are they going to? You, Michael?
Should be going to you. Although I think we have to change you to a presenter. Okay, let me take a swing at it.
Yeah, I don't see any.
Okay, so the first, can everybody hear me okay? Nobody, okay. Where? There's a flower down at the bottom bar. Matt, you see this down there? If you click on that, it should bring up the chat. It's to organize the panelists only. He's no longer panelist.
No, he's fine.
Oh, I thought he was a presenter now. Okay. Not there? All right, well, I'll ask it to you if you could restate it in your answer.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. We're struggling with the technology. It's on our side. Sorry. So the question comes from a gentleman named Frank Maffa. He'd like to know, does Concordia need so many roads repaved in such a few years? Can the repaving be spread out over a longer period of time or number of years? And some streets may not need total repaving, just fill in the cracks. I think you've touched on this topic earlier.
Yes, and that's a good point, and I believe that's what your community is doing. When we do our reserve, though, obviously we have to do it from an engineering standpoint and what we view as what their useful life, remaining useful life, is based on it from an engineering standpoint. As I said, though, and that's a good point, many communities will do repairs and crack fill and so forth to extend the life beyond that. Because it allows you to put away more money for future, reserves and so forth.
How much do we have to make annual contributions of in order to
Am I
make,
still screen sharing?
to find the estimated total replacement cost of $32,239,700?
Understood.
Very simple question.
It is, and it was answered. I'll ask it again. So one of the questions that has just come in now is from a woman who'd like to know how much the HOA has to put away in order to adequately fund.
Hey, Michael, give me 1 sec.
Sir.
That's what I want to know.
Right.
I mean, we're going to have a fund balance of $1,820,000 as of the end of the year. How much more are we going to be putting in to meet this figure of their estimated total replacement cost?
Ma'am, they had clearly said that there is no one that funds to the 32. That's a full
Right,
funding model.
exactly.
So it's a
5%,
5% model.
yes,
That's
which is
4.3.
Well, it'd be 1.6 million.
No, ma'am.
right?
No, that's incorrect. It's incorrect.
Then what is it?
It is as he said before, and it's as he showed on the screen, 5% threshold funding is 4.3, sorry.
4.3 million the first 2 years.
Thank you, 4.3 million the first 2 years. So to fund 4.3 million, you would deduct your,
What's in there?
no, but your annually funding, which is 2064. The
Right, I
delta
think it
is
comes
what
out to
needs-
about $100 a unit more. So if you take 4,356 minus 2,064,123 equals 2.2 million.
Okay, so the balance that's being made up.
Divide that by 1,757, divide it by 12, it comes out to about $100 a month more.
So if there was no change in any of the schedules of work, in order to adequately capture that funding, it would be an increase of about $100 per month per unit.
Right. Now that's a lot. So understand too, though, that you have, according to the new legislation, you have up to 10 years to bring your funding into compliance with the reserve study. So you got plenty of time. You don't have to do that and, right off the bat.
And Matthew, can you please expand on the idea that a reserve study is a forecast and a guideline tool? It is not a mandate.
It's not a mandate, but it's a budgeting, one of many budgeting tools that your community will use to assess and as far as your homeowners fees, but it's only one part of the picture. Your board has to make decisions, as we said. Same thing with the roads. You got to make decisions what makes sense with what your budget is. And the other thing is, we don't, as engineers, we don't know what your deferred or preventative maintenance fund looks like. We don't know what your operating expenses are. This is only one part of your overall, what we would call your accounting budgets for your community. And as far as how and how you'll get to where you need to be now. With respect to the new legislation, even though this is a budgeting tool, you are going to be required to get to, as I said, you have about 10 years to bring your funding up to a level that matches one of the funding, the estimated funding for your community based on a reserve study. And it's going to change from year to year. That's why you have to update these every few years. And again, we don't make that decision because we don't know all of your budgets. Typically, your board's going to talk to your, with each other, of course, and your accounting professionals and the association's attorney.
Sure. So with a community like ours, we have an overall budget of $10.8 million. As you see, little over 2 million is what we're funding the reserve fund. So in order for us to increase reserve funding, there are a number of ways a community of this size can do so. Would you agree with that statement?
Absolutely. And if you're only funding about 20% of your overall budget to your reserve, I would say, well, for a community your size, it would normally be closer to 25 or 30%. From what I see, it does vary depending on the size of the community. Some smaller communities don't have the economies of scale you guys do, so
right.
It does vary. But for a community like yours, it's 20% is a little bit low from what we see. Most communities this large, it's closer to 25 or 30%. But again, it varies. You guys have a deferred maintenance account that you utilize, so a lot of these communities don't have that.
So just to make sure I've exposed this, and if you could just kind of recapture it for me, the idea that the delta between the current funding and the year one funding you know, that 2 million plus divided by 1757. That is if there was no consideration at all in the reevaluation of the operating budget, right? So to your point, there's through budgetary planning, operational expenses could be trimmed, redirect those funds towards reserve, and reduce those monetary numbers that you were referring. What you put out there was based on a zero change
Yeah,
in
of
the
course.
operating.
Yeah.
Okay. Just want to make
Yeah,
sure that
absolutely. And what a lot of communities are doing with this new legislation is what they're doing is they're using what they're calling step-up funding, and it's, you know, it's, they see where they need to go, what the target is, say it's 5%, and they're stepping it up so much over the next, you know, 6-7 years. They're going to do it, or whatever it takes. It depends on the community, obviously.
Got it. Another question that had come in, which I'll ask you real quick.
Yeah, you're not going to raise your fees $100 a unit a month. You're
No,
just not
sir.
going to do that. Nobody does.
No one's intending that. So I just want to make sure that we put that out there.
Yeah,
Another
no,
question-
and I'm reinforcing that.
Thank you. Some of the expenses are not equally distributed over longer periods of years. It seems like they're kind of loaded in the earlier portion of the 30-year window. Is there a reason for that or a logic behind that?
Yeah, you have a number of again, there's a lot of roofs that were done, you know, between 20 and 25 years ago that, you know, are going to need new roofs. I don't know, you know, what your, again, decisions on that, you know, your board has to make, and you as a manager with respect to that, because you know whether or not you're getting roof leaks or having issues with certain areas or buildings. And you
Sure.
make, you know, you got to make those decisions accordingly. Same thing with the roads. A lot of the roads are showing signs of aging and cracking and so forth. So, you know, again, you got to make decisions on how to best repair and prolong the useful life depending on the component. But yeah, you have a lot of stuff that's aging. It's just what happens as a community matures.
Got it. The last question that was posted in the chat that I can see goes back to the new legislation. When will the New Jersey law that requires adherence to the study go into effect? That's calendar year 2025, yes?
Well, it goes into effect calendar year 2025, and there are still a few things that are being, you know, discussed between, you know, the attorneys and stuff. As far as some of the legislation, it may change a little bit, but yes, it goes into effect for as far as, to me, it's not going to change as far as the portion of the legislation that requires all community associations to have reserve studies done. They need to have it done by January of 2025. That's not going to change. So you guys
Right.
are okay. You've had it done.
Understood.
Well, I haven't though. We have over 350 reserves we have to do this year so far, because a lot of communities have never had one.
Never had them done, you mean, and came out?
Never. And you know, I look at you guys and stuff. You guys have had them done and stuff. I have communities that are, you know, they're in much worse shape than you guys are, because we have some sites that we're doing reserves that were boards over the years. They're 25, 30, 35-year-old sites, and boards never even put any money in reserves at all. We have one community that's almost $10 million in the red. Their roofs are failing, their roads are failing, their siding's failing. It's a shame.
And I'm guessing they're not as large scale as we are, so they don't have the economies of scale to help them.
This one's pretty big. This one has, it's not as big as yours, about half the size.
Okay.
But
Still
the
sizable.
prior boards didn't do anything. They didn't put any money away at all. It's a mess.
Okay.
Anyway, so we were talking about yours. So any other questions?
Yeah, so my only real next question that I would ask you is based on this and based on this study and the new legislation, I know we've talked about a cadence, feels like it's about a 3-year update period. Can you just speak to the logic behind this? a little bit and where the HOA benefits from updating this study. You know, I think the legislation calls for every 5 years.
Yeah, you really should do it at a site like yours every 3 or 4 years at the most. And the reason is because you have a large site, you have a lot of stuff going on, you have a lot of replacements that are taking place, and a lot of you have a high, you know, your fund balance and your contribution and so forth, and your expenses are all very high. So that you can stay up to speed on all that, it's best to do it about every 3 years so that you can see where you stand. We can update it as far as any items and all items that have been replaced with respect to roofs, roads, clubhouse items, so forth and so on. And once those items have been replaced, obviously they have a new, a full remaining useful life, which means that the funding for them goes down significantly for those items, as well as you're updating your initial fund balance. That'll include any interest and so forth. And of course, you know, whatever expenses you've had will also be adjusted too. So, you know, you wait too long and you know, you can wait 5 years. It's up to you guys. The law says you can go up to 5 years. We recommend 3.
Understood. You have a question? I don't see any other questions have come into the chat.
Okay.
And nobody's shouting at me or coming. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Question's coming in, Matt.
Since my parents were part of the original pioneers that formed Concordia
Okay.
many years ago, I'm familiar with this wonderful community. And if I start to cry, it's because I love Concordia. I understand everything this man is saying because I figured out what the meeting was about. It is an old community, but it's a community filled with people. Older
So
ones.
what's the question?
We're getting you. It's okay.
I'm trying to come up with a question for you, sir. Your job is to provide us with information. Thank you for the information that you provided to Concordia. I believe we paid you to do it. In other words, I'm just going to say thank you for the information. I guess I don't have a question, but to everybody in this room who came out tonight, thank you for coming because you're here to get educated about where you live. You pay, homeowners. You pay. And I'm a senior citizen also. And sometimes you go, how am I going to afford it? But please don't anybody move out of Concordia. I mean it. And I'll give you my name. I'll give you my phone number. I'm sorry if I didn't come up with a question.
That's quite all right. I appreciate you coming out.
Thank you.
No problem. Matthew, I don't think we have any questions. Are there any other questions? No. If anyone has
Okay,
any questions, certainly direct them to us.
Okay, and if there are any, let me know. You can always, you know, you can always call me tomorrow if anything else comes up. Who should I make the presenter though before I sign off?
You can make it Corey Harris.
Corey Harris.
Thank you.
You got it. Okay.
Matt, thank you very much. On behalf
You're
of
welcome.
the community, the board, the association, management, we thank you very much. Hold on. Are you still there? I think he's
Yeah.
gone. Oh, you're still
you hear
there.
me?
Okay. Hold on. Yes. What's the question? They don't hire anybody to do work for us. No. No, there's a question about whether Falcon is incentivized by fees from contractors if you retain them for service here. It doesn't.
No.
You're not-
No. We are not decision makers. When we do anything, it's, you know, it's like we did with the reserve. We gave you a proposal, and I'm sure you got others, and you made a decision. And when it comes to other stuff, no, we do not have any contractors that work for us or that we work for. They're all hired by the associations.
Thank you.
No, we have no conflicts of interest whatsoever. We're very diligent about that.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate that.
Sure. All right.
Yes, thank you. There may be some follow-up questions as we will replay this broadcast throughout the community. I expect
Okay.
some people to ask me some questions, and I'll forward them to you as they come in.
Awesome. I'm going to go get some dinner now.
Enjoy yourself. Thank you, Matt.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thanks for your
Appreciate
time. Have
Good
a
night,
good
sir.
evening and stay cool.
Yes, thank you.